There is something that has been growing inside you for months, maybe longer than that. You can't name it. There is no specific event that you can point to, no single moment where things cracked. But something in his inner world has shifted, and the ground beneath his feet no longer feels solid. You wake up, and the life you've built feels like it belongs to someone else. Relationships that once seemed essential now feel like clothes you no longer fit. Goals you've pursued for years suddenly seem hollow, as if you were running towards a destination that was never really yours. And underneath it all, there is a quiet, relentless pressure, as if something huge was trying to emerge, but hadn't yet broken through the surface. Carl Jung spent his entire life studying exactly this phenomenon. He watched this movement unfold in patient after patient, and what he discovered about these periods of increasing inner pressure was both frightening and deeply hopeful. He found that the psyche does not change gradually. It builds up tension in silence, reorganizes itself under consciousness, and then erupts into transformation so sudden and so total that the person experiencing it feels as if his entire reality has been dismantled overnight. Jung did not see it as a collapse. He saw it as the most important process a human being can go through. And he warned that people who resist suffer much more than those who allow it to happen. You who are here now, feeling this pressure, this feeling that something huge is coming, Jung would say that you are not imagining it. Your unconscious has already made a decision that your conscious mind has not yet reached. And what comes next will change everything, but not in the way you think, and not in the time you would choose. This is what no one tells you about real transformation. It doesn't ask permission. She doesn't wait for you to be ready. It begins when your psyche decides that the cost of remaining who you were outweighs the cost of becoming who you really are. And when that moment arrives, and it has already arrived for you, there is no turning back. You are an empath, and that means you felt that pressure before you could understand it. You noticed the change in the deeper layers before it came to the surface, and he probably tried to convince himself that it was tiredness, that it was a phase, that it would pass when things got organized. But it did not pass, because it wasn't tiredness, it was the call. It was your shadow, everything you had to bury to survive, all your depth that was treated as excess, all your sensitivity that was taught to hide, beginning to push from the inside out, not with violence, with that constant quiet pressure that you already know so well. Jung understood that the psyche has its own intelligence. It accumulates. It records every time you silenced an instinct because it was inconvenient, every time you stayed in something that violated who you are, each time you performed a version of yourself so that others would be comfortable, while something authentic inside you was slowly dying. You didn't feel it because you were too busy managing the surface. But underneath, the forces of transformation were gathering, and now they have reached the surface, and everything is about to change. Not because the external world is moving, but because the internal world has already moved, and the external reality always, sooner or later, conforms to what is happening inside. This video won't give you ready-made answers. It won't offer you strategies or steps to follow. What Jung discovered and what you're about to understand goes far beyond that. Because what's happening to you isn't a problem to solve. It is a passage to cross. The pressure you feel isn't a crisis. It's your unconscious deciding for you. There is a specific moment in the life of certain people when something stops working. Not just one thing, but all at the same time. The motivation disappears. Relationships that once made sense begin to feel hollow. The work you have built with so much effort starts to taste like something that belongs in another life. And you wonder what's wrong with you. Why, just now that everything should be fine, do you feel so disconnected from everything? Carl Jung observed this pattern so many times in so many different people that he came to a conclusion that goes against everything we've been taught about mental health. This is not collapse. This is the most intelligent process that the human psyche is capable of performing. He called it enantiodromia, a term he borrowed from the Greek philosopher Heraclitus. The principle that when anything in the psyche reaches its extreme, it turns into its opposite. Not slowly, not through careful deliberation, suddenly, like a pendulum that has been pulled as far as possible in one direction and then released. The farther it was pulled, the stronger the swing back. You spent years being a thing very intensely. Maybe he was the person who was always available to others, the one who absorbed the pain of others without complaining. The one who smiled when she was drowning because she learned early on that her feelings were inconvenient to the people around her. Maybe she was the dedicated person, the responsible one, the one who never disappointed, the one who always found a way to keep going, even when there was no more energy to do so. And you were that person for so long that you forgot it was a choice. It just felt like who you were. But the unconscious registered everything. Every time you silenced an instinct because it was inconvenient, it wrote it down. Each time you got into a situation that violated something deep inside you, the pressure increased. Each time you performed a version of yourself so that others would be comfortable. While something authentic inside you slowly died, a new crack formed along the fault. You didn't feel it because you were too busy managing the surface. Jung likened this process to tectonic plates moving deep within the earth. For years, nothing visible happens. The landscape seems stable. Life goes on normally, but the pressure is building up along fault lines that no one can see. Then one day the earthquake hits, and everyone thinks it came out of nowhere, but it didn't come out of nowhere. It was being built all the time. The same happens with you. The transformation that is happening now in your life did not start yesterday. It started years ago, when your unconscious started to register the distance between who you were pretending to be and who you really are. And that distance has been growing, and the pressure was increasing until the moment the psyche decided, not you, the psyche, that it was time to course correct. That's the point Jung wanted people to understand. You're not in control of that decision. Your unconscious has already made a decision that your conscious mind has not yet reached. And the signs are everywhere if you know how to recognize them. The first is what Jung called the loss of meaning. The things that mattered stop mattering. Not in a depressive way, where everything gets heavy and dark. In a strange, detached way, where you look at your life and feel nothing. The promotion you've chased for years arrives, and you feel empty instead of triumphant. The relationship that defined your world suddenly feels like watching the movie of someone else's love story. Jung explained that meaning does not disappear. He withdraws. When the psyche is preparing for transformation, it draws its energy from the old structures, like blood that recedes from the extremities to protect vital organs during an attack. Things that lose meaning are not being destroyed, they are being divested. Your psyche is regaining the energy it had distributed through your old life, because it needs that energy for what comes next. The emptiness you feel is not loss, it's relocation. The second sign is the intensification of dreams. Jung paid extraordinary attention to dreams because he considered them to be direct communications from the unconscious to the conscious mind. And he found that before major transformations, dreams become vivid, disturbing, and impossible to ignore. Dreams of natural disasters, from unfamiliar houses to rooms you've never seen. Of death that doesn't seem scary, but strangely peaceful. Of water. Large bodies of water rising, flooding, reshaping the landscape. These are not random. They are the unconscious saying in the only language it has that the inner world is restructuring itself and that the outer world is about to follow. The third sign is the collapse of tolerance. Suddenly you can't stand things you've endured for years. The friend who always talks about himself. The family dynamic where your role is to absorb everyone's anxiety. The job where you perform an enthusiasm you don't feel. The relationship where you have been diminishing yourself to avoid conflict. One day you wake up and the tolerance is simply gone, not because something dramatic happened, because your psyche has decided that the cost of maintaining these arrangements now outweighs the cost of disrupting them. The unconscious did its math. The equation no longer closes, and their sudden intolerance is the first visible sign that internal restructuring has come to the surface. This is not weakness, it is not instability, it is not something that needs to be corrected with more effort or more patience. It's your psyche doing exactly what it was designed to do, and what she's saying is simple. The time has come. The moment the psyche reaches the edge and everything stops working at the same time. There is a moment that Jung described with disturbing accuracy, a moment that most people who go through it interpret as the worst of their life, a moment where everything that worked stops working simultaneously. Not a thing, not two, everything. The motivation disappears overnight. The relationships that underpinned his identity begin to seem unsustainable. The work that used to give structure to your day becomes almost unbearable to perform. The habits that kept you stable stop working, and underneath it all, a sense of disorientation so deep that you begin to doubt yourself in ways you had never doubted before. Who am I if I am not what I have built? What is left when everything that defined me stops making sense? Jung found in these moments not the sign of a mind that is failing, but the sign of a psyche that is finally working to its full capacity. Because what is happening right now is not destruction, it is correction. The deepest, most intelligent part of you, what Jung called the self, the totality of the psyche that operates far below consciousness, has decided to initiate a course correction. The conscious personality had drifted too far in one direction. It had become too rigid, too identified with a way of being, too invested in a version of reality that no longer served the person's deeper development. And the self, which always moves toward wholeness, decided it was time to dismantle what had become a cage. Discomfort is not a disease. It is the psyche doing exactly what it was designed to do. What makes this process so difficult to go through is that the preparation happens entirely underground. You don't get a warning. There is no smooth transition where the old gradually gives way to the new. There is silent accumulation, and then rupture. There is the before and after, separated by a moment of total disorientation that can last days, weeks, or in some cases, months. And during this time, the most powerful temptation there is to try to force everything back to normal. Jung warned that this is the first and most dangerous of the two traps that people fall into at this time. The person feels the ground moving and grabs it tighter. It reaffirms the relationship that is dying. He throws himself even deeper into the career he is suffocating. Perform enthusiasm with more intensity, hoping that if you try a little harder, the old meaning will return. It won't. You can't reinvest energy in structures that your psyche has already decided you've overcome. Fighting against transformation does not prevent it. It just makes the eventual eruption more violent. The second pitfall is premature action. The person feels the pressure building and begins to blow up their own life impulsively. He quits his job without a plan. He ends the relationship in an outburst of anger. She makes dramatic statements that seem liberating in the moment, but create chaos for which she is not prepared. Jung called this acting transformation rather than going through it. The energy of change is discharged through the external drama rather than being allowed to do its inner work. A person changes circumstances but does not change himself, and within a year it rebuilt the exact same patterns in a new setting, because the real transformation never happened. The path that Jung defended was not resistance or impulsive action. It was what he called conscious suffering, staying present with the discomfort of transformation without trying to correct it, run away from it, or force it to resolve itself in its own time. This requires a specific kind of courage that most people don't realize exists, the courage not to know, to sit in the space between who you were and who you are becoming without requiring the process to speed up or slow down, of letting the old identity dissolve without immediately seeking a new one. This is where the real work is, not in the dramatic moment of change, in the unbearable weight that precedes it. And for the empath, this weight has a particular dimension, because the empath feels not only his own transformation process, but also the turbulence of the people around him in the face of the changes he is going through. He feels the anxiety of those who depended on the old version of him. He feels the discomfort of those who do not understand what is happening, and often, out of a lifetime's habit, it begins to contract back into the old pattern just to ease the discomfort of others. But this time, something is different. This time, contraction is no longer possible in the same way, because the psyche has already crossed a threshold that does not allow complete return. And trying to go back to what was creates even greater pain than continuing to move forward into the unknown. Jung said that this is the most important moment in a person's life, not because it is the most dramatic, but because that's where the real decision is made, not by the conscious mind, but by the totality of being. The decision to become whole, even if it costs everything you thought you were. Why resisting transformation destroys you more than letting it happen. There is a deep-rooted belief in almost all of us that we are the ones who should control the direction of our lives. That growth is something that we plan, that we choose, that we execute with discipline and intention. That if something is changing without our permission, something is wrong. Jung spent decades deconstructing this belief. No, because autonomy doesn't matter, but because there is a form of control that does not protect, that imprisons. And it is exactly this control that deep transformation comes to break. When the psyche begins the process of change, most people's first response is to intensify control, work more, plan better, create more structure, find a way to solve what seems to be breaking. As if disorientation is an efficiency problem that can be corrected with more effort. But what is happening is not a lack of effort. It is the opposite. It is the exhaustion of a way of being that has been built on excessive effort. About performing, about adapting, about bending to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. And the psyche won't let you continue. Jung discovered that the more a person resists the transformation that is being initiated by the unconscious, the more painful and prolonged the process becomes. It's like trying to hold a door shut when the pressure on the other side already exceeds what any human force can contain. You can push yourself for a while. You may feel like you're maintaining control, but it is only increasing the violence with which the door will finally open. Resistance does not cancel the transformation, it postpones and intensifies it. For the empath, this resistance has a specific and very recognizable form. It does not appear as obvious stubbornness. It appears as care, as a responsibility, like the feeling that you can't allow yourself to go through this transformation right now because the people around you need you, because it's not the right time, because the consequences would be too much. You put off yourself for the sake of others, but Jung would say that there is something that needs to be clearly named here. Postponing your transformation does not protect the people you love. It just ensures that you'll push yourself to the limit in a much more destructive way later on, because the psyche does not give up. It just finds more and more urgent ways to communicate that change is needed, and these forms become harder to ignore over time. The body begins to speak what the mind refuses to hear. Fatigue becomes chronic. Anxiety sets in ways that have never been installed before. Disturbing dreams occupy the nights. A sense of emptiness that does not respond to any of the old remedies. No work, no relationships, no external achievements begins to be the default state. This is not weakness. It is not a character flaw. It is the price of resisting what is inevitable. Jung also identified something equally important. Resistance doesn't just prolong suffering. It prevents the transformation from being completed in a healthy way. When change is continually resisted, it fragments. Parts of the process are completed while others are suspended. The person comes out the other side partially transformed, no longer completely who they were, but also not completely who they could become. Stuck in the middle. Neither the old identity with its predictability, nor the new one with its freedom. Just the discomfort of both without the relief of either. The surrender that Jung proposed was not passivity. It was an active form of cooperation with the deepest intelligence of his own psyche. It was the willingness to say, I don't know where this is taking me, but I trust that there is a direction. I can't see the other side, but I recognize that there is another side. And this surrender, paradoxically, is the most courageous act that exists, because it requires you to let go of the identity you have built with so much effort, that you trust something that cannot be verified by the rational mind. May you remain present in a disorientation that your entire survival instinct wants you to address immediately. To the empath reading this right now, the transformation you've been resisting won't go away. She's waiting, with the infinite patience of the unconscious, for you to stop fighting her. And the moment you stop will be the moment you start moving. The death of the old identity and the void that needs to be crossed. Jung used a word that most people avoid when talking about personal transformation. Death. Not metaphorically. Not as a figure of speech to soften what is happening. He meant that the process of profound transformation involves an actual death, not of the body, but of something that is so central to who you believe it to be that the distinction may not seem important at the time it is happening. The death of the old identity. Everything you used to define yourself, the roles you played, the stories you told about yourself, the ways you found to create meaning, the patterns that kept you safe even when they cost you dearly, all of it starts to dissolve. And the process of dissolution is often indistinguishable from grief, because it's mourning. You're grieving for a version of yourself, for a way of existing in the world that, as limiting as it was also familiar to you. That gave you a sense of continuity, of knowing who you were when you woke up in the morning. And now that continuity is being interrupted by something that didn't ask for your opinion on timing, for the empath, this grief has layers that less sensitive people do not experience in the same way. There is mourning for identity, but there is also mourning for the relationships that this identity sustained. Because when you change in a real and profound way, the people around you who were related to the old version of you have to readjust. And not all of them can. Some don't want to. Some needed you to stay who you were so that the dynamic between you would continue to make sense to them. And you feel it. He feels their discomfort. He feels the resistance. And a part of you that still carries the old pattern wants to step back, wants to shrink back, wants to be who they need you to be. But this part is losing strength. Jung described the space between the death of the old identity and the birth of the new as emptiness, and he was very honest about how unbearable that space can be. You are no longer who you were. He is not yet who he is becoming. You belong nowhere, you fit into nothing, and the feeling of not having a solid floor can be overwhelming. Most people try to get out of that void as quickly as possible, and this is exactly the mistake that Jung warned about. Because emptiness is not a problem to be solved. It is a necessary space. It is where the deepest work of transformation takes place, not in the great dramatic ruptures, but in that disorienting silence where the old form dissolves and the new one still has no clear contours. It is in the void that the shadow finally finds space to be seen. Everything that you have pushed to the edges of your consciousness over the years, all the anger that was not allowed, all the ambition that seemed too dangerous, all the sadness that was left without an address, all the depth that was called excess, begins to emerge in that space, and the first encounter with these parts of yourself is rarely comfortable. Jung did not romanticize this process. He knew that the encounter with the shadow could be disturbing, disorienting, sometimes terrifying. But I also knew that this encounter is the heart of transformation. It is here that the empath discovers that what he called too much sensitivity was actually perception that had been forbidden to have an object. That what he called excessive need was actually a soul that had never really been nurtured. That what he called weakness was strength that didn't know where to go. The key to crossing this void is not to find something new to fill the space. It's having the courage to stay in empty space long enough for what's authentically yours to begin to emerge. Not built by other people's expectations, not shaped by survival, but born of the truest part of who you are. And that takes the time it takes, not the time you would choose, the time that the process requires. What is born on the other side, the personality that has always been yours? There is something Jung discovered about what emerges on the other side of deep transformation that completely changes the way we understand the whole process. It is not an improved version of the old self. It is not the same person with new habits, new perspectives, new life strategies. What is born on the other side is something qualitatively different, what Jung called the birth of true personality. The version of you that existed before socializing, trauma, and adaptation buried you. The version that her whole life has been unconsciously moving towards, even when her conscious choices were moving away from her. Jung identified specific qualities that distinguish this emergent personality from the performed self that came before. The first is what he called psychological sovereignty. The person stops organizing their life around the expectations of others, not out of selfishness or rebellion, but because the transformation burned the part of her that believed her worth depended on external validation. She can still love, can still connect, but no longer contort yourself into shapes designed to make others comfortable. The need to be approved, included, accepted has been replaced by something deeper. A relationship with yourself that doesn't need anyone's permission. For the empath, this change is revolutionary. Because the empath has spent years defining himself by the ability to sense others, to tune in to what others needed, to become what was needed in each situation, and in doing so, he often lost the thread back to himself. He lost the ability to distinguish what was genuinely his from what he had absorbed from his environment. The psychological sovereignty that emerges on the other side of the transformation does not erase this sensitivity. She anchors it. The empath continues to feel deeply, but now has a center from which to feel, rather than being constantly swept away by the currents of what he feels. The second quality is the integration of the shadow. Before the transformation, most people operate from a carefully edited version of themselves. Acceptable parts are on display. The unacceptable ones, anger, selfishness, ambition, sexuality, darkness, are hidden in the unconscious, where they wreak havoc without being acknowledged. After genuine transformation, these rejected parts were confronted and integrated. The person is no longer pretending to be good. It is whole, which means you have access to its full range of human capability. It can be gentle and fierce, generous and boundary, compassionate and firm, depending on what the situation requires. This wholeness is what Jung called individuation, and it is radically different from the one-dimensional goodness that most people perform. The third quality is what Jung described as alignment with destiny. Not destiny in some predetermined mystical sense, but the recognition that your life has a trajectory that your conscious mind did not design, that there is an intelligence operating through your choices, your wounds, your seemingly random experiences that has been molding you towards something specific. After transformation, people often look back on their entire life and see the pattern for the first time. The suffering was not random, the deviations were not mistakes. The things that seemed to be tearing you apart were actually dismantling the false structures that stood between you and who you were meant to become. Jung said, "Sudden transformation looks like destruction while it is happening, but it looks like fate in retrospect. Because while you're in it, all you can see is what you're missing, but once you crossed it, you see that everything that fell had to fall, that the psyche wasn't destroying your life. He was making room for the life that was truly his own. And for the empath who has reached the other side of this crossing, there is a recognition that has no equivalent in any other experience, that your sensitivity, which has been treated for so long as a burden, is actually the most accurate instrument you have. That feeling deeply isn't a defect. It's what allows you to exist in dimensions of reality that others simply can't reach. The only preparation possible. Let go of who you were to become. Who you are. Jung was honest about something that most narratives of transformation avoid saying. You can't prepare for that. Not in the conventional way. There is no set of strategies that protect you from what is coming. There is no processing method that makes the process painless. There is no amount of reading, therapy, meditation, self-knowledge that fully prepares you for the moment when your psyche decides that the time has come for you to become whole. Because the conventional preparation is always done by the old ego, to protect the old ego. And what is coming cannot be controlled by the old ego. What Jung discovered was something different and much deeper. The only possible preparation is internal, and it does not have the form we expect. It is not hoarding tools. It is to develop a different relationship with the unknown. It's not about creating more structure. It is learning to trust in the absence of structure. It's not knowing where you're going. It is developing the ability to move, even without knowing it. All of this comes down to a single disposition, the willingness to let go. Let go of the identity that you have built with so much effort over the years. Drop the stories that tell you who you are. Drop the roles that give you a recognizable place in the world. Letting go of the need for the people around you to understand what's happening to you. Loosen control over the timing and form of the transformation. For the empath, this letting go has a particular dimension, because the empath has often built his identity entirely in relation to others. Your sense of who you are is intertwined with what others need, with what others feel, with what others think about you. And letting go is not just letting go of an idea of oneself, it's letting go of an entire way of existing in the world that has been built over a lifetime. But Jung said that this is precisely the release that liberates, because as long as your identity is anchored entirely in the external, you do not have a self, you have a collection of adaptations, and adaptations do not grow, do not deepen, do not become more real over time. They just become more exhausting to maintain. What is born when you let go is not emptiness. It is his own presence, finally without mediation. Jung believed that people who successfully navigate sudden transformation share one quality. They trust the process more than they trust fear. Not blind trust, not passive acceptance, but a deep and grounded recognition that the psyche is intelligent, that the pressure they feel has a purpose, that what is dissolving needed to dissolve, and that what emerges from the other side will be more real, more whole, and more alive than anything the old self could have built. This is the way to prepare, not accumulating armor against change, gathering the courage to stand defenseless as change passes you by, letting it dismantle what needs to be dismantled, letting her reveal what was hidden, letting her rearrange her life according to a blueprint that her conscious mind never drew, but that her deepest being has always carried. You've made it this far. That says it all about who you're becoming. The person you were would not have arrived. I would not have been able to stay present with all this. I would not have had the courage to look inward with that honesty, but you are here. And that means that the transformation that seemed impossible has already begun. Not on the surface yet, but in the depths. In the same depths where Jung found, patient after patient, the same truth he spent his life describing, that the psyche is not lost. She finds herself. And that encounter, with its real depth, with its sensitivity as a gift rather than a burden, with its rarity as truth rather than isolation, is what has been waiting for you all along. On the other side of what is dying there is what has always been yours, and you don't need permission anymore to be that.